What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my fellow host, Sulman Haque. What's up, man? How are you?
Yo, what's going on, man?
Not much, not much. So, on today's episode, we are picking our very own NFL All-Decade team for players drafted during the 1990s. So, I know the NFL has already done this, but we're going to do it a little bit differently. So, Sulman and I took turns filling out each position snake draft style. So he went first, then I went second and third, and so on and so forth. We picked a total of 14 players each, and the only rule that we had to follow was that this player had to be drafted during the 1990s. So from the 1990 draft all the way through 1999. So a player like John Elway, for example, who's on the NFL's All-Decade team for the 90s, wouldn't be eligible because he was drafted way back in 1983. So we had a lot of fun picking each player, and this was the era where both of us started watching the NFL as 90s babies, so it was super nostalgic as well. So let's jump right in with the teams, and we'll start with Sulman's choice at quarterback. So it's all you, man.
I took Peyton Manning here. Obviously, one of the best quarterbacks drafted here in the 90s. Probably one of the best quarterbacks to play in the NFL. No-brainer pick here for me. And, here's some of his accolades: two-time Super Bowl champ, Super Bowl MVP, five-time NFL MVP, two-time Offensive Player of the Year, 10-time All-Pro, 13-time Pro Bowler, holds the NFL record for most passing touchdowns in a season with 55. So basically any stat you name it, and obviously he's a Hall of Famer here, and just a great quarterback to build a franchise around, and that's why I took Peyton Manning here.
No-brainer pick. The only, I don't want to say problem, but the only kind of nitpick I'll do is he was drafted in 1998. So I know I have some guys drafted
Yes.
there too. But the funny thing is that there really wasn't that many great quarterbacks drafted in the 90s.
Yeah,
It's kinda crazy.
surprisingly. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like your pick here, and then maybe like one or two other guys you could maybe think about. That's about it.
Yeah, exactly. So my pick that Salman is alluding to is Brett Favre. So he was picked in 1994 in the second round, top of the second round by the Falcons, was traded after his rookie year to the Green Bay Packers. And I really hate that I'm picking him because he's kind of a scumbag.
Yeah.
We've seen with all the news that's come out. But honestly, pickings are slim. There's a lot of decent guys that were drafted in the 90s, but no one really other than Kurt Warner that I considered, even though he wasn't drafted. He was drafted, I'm sorry, by the Packers, but which is kind of ironic, right? But it just, it's hard to not pick Brett Favre, right? For all the same reasons, that you want to pick Peyton Manning. He's a three-time first-team All-Pro, three-time second-team, three-time MVP, which I honestly forgot. He won the MVP 3 years in a row.
Yes,
95,
he had some
96,
great
97.
years.
Yeah, and only won one Super Bowl. But we say only one, like it's an easy thing to do, especially in Green Bay where you don't get.
But
free agents.
he went to two back to back.
There you go. He sure did, and lost to one of the greatest quarterbacks in all time in John Elway. So nothing to be ashamed of. In terms of like total accumulated stats, it's hard to beat, right? He's fourth all time in passing yards, fourth in touchdowns. He's first all time in interceptions by, I think, like 60 interceptions. And he's just like the all-time gunslinger, right? He played till he was 40. He was a Pro Bowler, I think, in his last year at 39. And yeah, it's weird, man. All of the great quarterbacks that we think of from this era, I guess between like 85 and 2000, they were all drafted in the 80s. Joe Montana, yep. Steve Young, Dan Marino, John Elway, Troy Aikman, so all these other guys kind of were. It was like a weird like middle class of quarterbacks that doesn't fit the bill. So, but yeah, that's my pick for the quarterback. So who did you pick as your first wide receiver?
I went Marvin Harrison here. Only reason I went Marvin Harrison was because you had taken Randy Moss in our snake draft here. But I went Marvin Harrison. He was drafted in 96, round 1, pick 19, and again, taken by the Colts. And, this was a connection that, Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison did really well with the Colts. So why not, bring them back here together for my team? Another Hall of Famer guy. He has over 1,100 career receptions. He's top 5 all time in receptions. and over 14,500 yards, top 10 there as well, and then 128 touchdowns, so top 5 there as well. And then, 8-time All-Pro and 8-time Pro Bowler. So just a good, consistent, great wide receiver that you could rely on. And, Peyton Manning, was relied on Marvin Harrison a lot here, and so I put them back here together.
He's the master of the toe tap catch.
Yes,
when I think of Marvin Harrison, I think of Peyton Manning throwing the ball like placing it perfectly, like a yard and a half out of bounds, and this dude is almost horizontal with his toes at the back of the end zone, and he's making the catch. That's what I think of. But let me ask you a question: do you know what Marvin Harrison sounds like?
Do I know what Marvin Harrison?
Yeah,
he has a strange voice, right? Like it's been a while since I've heard him, but he has his voice doesn't fit his face. He's one of those guys, right?
Yeah, and it's not even that. It's just like I can probably count the number of times I've heard this guy talk. He's the anti-diva, right? I don't think he wore gloves. If he did wear gloves, it was plain black ones. He never did anything, at least on the field, that made you look at him other than his play. He wasn't yelling on the sidelines. He kind of has that Amari Cooper type demeanor where he's just stone faced, right? No emotion, no nothing.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, we come to find out post retirement that he may be a murderer. We don't know.
The whole incident in Philly.
There was a couple incidents in Philly, right? So there's a lot of mystery surrounding this guy, and people use the phrase, "Oh, he's a stone cold killer" in sports all the time, but it may be
he may literally have been a stone cold killer.
Exactly, right? People joke that he's like the Voldemort of the NFL. Like, you don't want to say his name.
His son's coming up soon in the NFL. He's on Ohio State right now.
Yeah, he should be a top 3 pick probably after next season when he's all done. So you mentioned that I took Randy Moss, so thank you for spoiling my pick. So as I said, we did snake draft. So Mom went first, I went second and third, and I had to pick Randy Moss. I couldn't not. I know he was He was drafted in 1998, but he was an amazing rookie, so he still balled out in the 90s. And I think he's considered by many, not me, maybe me, I don't know, as not the greatest receiver, but the best receiver of all time. Like, if you had one season, you could pick one guy, or one game, you're picking Randy Moss in terms of his talent, physical attributes, all that stuff. I mean, I would probably still pick Jerry Rice, maybe even Calvin Johnson, but I'm kind of biased against Jerry Rice because I'm a Raiders fan. So he did have some attitude issues. He did loaf at times. He famously didn't really block because he didn't want to. It's just
You're also maybe partially biased against Randy Moss because he was a Raider for 1 year.
Exactly.
His worst year of his NFL career.
Yeah, he cried his way out of Oakland, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But if he had Jerry Rice's mentality, he would be the greatest football player ever by like a big margin, I think.
Absolutely.
Despite all that, he's fourth all-time in yards. He's second all-time in touchdown, and which this shows the kind of player that he was and the amazing deep threat that he was. Despite being fourth all-time in yards and second in touchdowns, he's 15th in receptions. So he's doing a lot more with a lot less. And, when you think of Randy Moss, what do you picture? You picture him streaking either, down the sideline or down the middle of the field with his hand up. Like, hey, yep. I toasted this DB and I'm wide open. So chuck the ball up. And yeah, his accolades: 4-time All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler, 3 seasons with 15 plus receiving touchdowns, and the NFL record for receiving touchdowns, which still stands with 23. So this was set in 2007. So yeah, it's hard not to pick this guy, basically.
Yep, absolutely. Randy Moss is definitely one of my favorite receivers growing up behind Jerry Rice.
I still have his Raiders jersey. I will not deny that. His talent is supreme. So after picking Randy Moss, so who is your second wide receiver?
I went with Terrell Owens. He was drafted in 96, round 3, pick 89 by the 49ers. Another one of my all-time favorite wide receivers, having watched him on the Niners. Terrell Owens, Hall of Famer, 5-time All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler. He led the NFL in receiving touchdowns 3 times in his career. Of course, he was a bit of a diva, but a great wide receiver and probably one of the best drafted in the '90s. I would say it wasn't even close for me after Terrell Owens. Obviously, you have your Randy Moss, Marvin Harrison, and after that, to me, it's Terrell Owens. And I think the '90s had a lot of good receivers, maybe a few great ones, but when you think of prototypical wide receivers, I think of Terrell Owens. And yeah, he had the attitude problems, things like that. Infamously, said some things about his quarterback Jeff Garcia, things like that. But the talent was there, and like you said, right, with Randy Moss, if he had the work ethic of Jerry Rice, these guys would have been just all timers. They would, and then they still did pretty well, but they would just been on another level if they had that work ethic there and the less diva attitude.
Yeah, I don't think you can ever accuse Terrell Owens of having a bad work ethic. I think he just had attitude problems because he was always in shape. I feel like he always tried hard. I know he had some issues with drops early on in his career. He never had like the best hands. He didn't have Jerry Rice type hands, but he was the prototype. He was big and strong and fast, and he's 50 years old now. Supposedly still runs in like the 4.7s. So he was a physical freak, just like Randy Moss, but in a different kind of way. So great pick. My choice is Isaac Bruce. So it's kind of crazy how good Isaac Bruce was. He's an unassuming type dude. It's kind of funny how we both have one diva, one quiet guy for our wide receivers.
Got to mix it up, right?
Yeah, right. And I considered I considered Rod Smith from the Broncos. I also considered Torrey Holt, but Isaac Bruce has better numbers than both of those guys. He played longer. He's 5th all time in yards, which is crazy to think about. That's not a name that comes up. I know he did play on the Greatest Show on Turf and all that, but you don't really consider him as one of the best in terms of pure yardage. 13th all-time in catches, and he was only All-Pro once, but he's still a Hall of Famer. But I guess if you think about the era that he played in, he's playing in the same era as Tim Brown, Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Marvin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's understandable why he probably wasn't first or second team All-Pro with all those other guys playing, but he still had, from start to finish of his career, one of the greatest wide receiver careers in the history of the NFL. So that's my pick.
Yeah, I like that pick. And also another ex-49er. I remember his time on the Niners. He's always a guy you could just rely on, right? He, throw him the ball, he's going to go catch it, he's going to make a little bit of a play, things like that. Just a solid wide receiver. And, of course, I remember him from the Rams as well. So,
yep, and a Hall of Famer, as we said. Alrighty. So we'll move on to running backs. So who was so you got first pick for running backs, or did you? Yeah, you did. So who did you pick for running backs?
No, actually, you did. You had the first pick, but
oh, well, there you go. That explains my pick even more because I'll tell you why. But you go first. Go ahead. Who was your running back of choice?
I won't ruin your pick, but he definitely would have been on the board for me. But we'll talk about it when it's your turn to talk. I went Emmitt Smith here, guy drafted in 1990, first round pick. He went 17th. Longtime Cowboy running back. He's the all-time leading rusher in NFL history. Also has the most rushing touchdowns in NFL history. He's was an MVP in 1993, a 3-time Super Bowl champ, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 6-time All-Pro, 8-time Pro Bowler. I think, I would have considered someone like Terrell Davis here or Curtis Martin, but, passing up Emmitt Smith, the guy who holds the record, who holds the all-time leading rusher in the NFL history and has the most rushing touchdowns, you can't just pass up a guy like that. It'd have to be for someone special, which I think you will get into in your next pick here. But guys like Terrell Davis and Curtis Martin were good, but just not as good and didn't play as long as Emmitt Smith here.
I don't love it, but I understand it. He is the NFL's leading rusher. I know people always talk about the O-line that he played with in Dallas, where they used Barry Sanders as a counterpoint to him. It's like Barry Sanders was dodging 3 guys at the line of scrimmage just so he could get a 5-yard gain, and Emmitt Smith would run 5 yards without being touched. But all that context aside, he is the NFL's leading rusher. So I get the pick. Me personally, I loved my player even more, and that's Marshall Faulk. So Marshall Faulk was picked second overall in the 1994 draft by the Colts. and he was traded after 3 years before the end of his rookie deal, or just at the end of his rookie deal because he wanted a new contract and the Colts didn't want to pay him. So great job, Colts. He goes to the Rams, and he becomes the focal point of one of the greatest offenses in NFL history. And he was just an insanely versatile player. He had 4 seasons with over 2,000 scrimmage yards. He had, I think, 2 with close to 2,500. And he's just, when you think of dual threat running backs, you think of guys like Le'Veon Bell, Christian McCaffrey, at least in this day and age. And they're all just, copies basically of Marshall Faulk. They're imitations of Marshall Faulk. The guy has almost 800 receptions in his career, and he actually won MVP. He was so good that he won MVP in 2000, and then the following year, he was second in the MVP race to Kurt Warner. So it seems like they split the vote, which he probably should have won it again. He's 5th all-time in scrimmage yards behind Jerry Rice, Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, and Frank Gore. People.
Wow.
I know, right?
All right.
You wouldn't have thought. And he was just a cool player, man. Those Rams jerseys, when they switched over to the navy blue with the gold and that 28, it kind of looked like Superman, and he was Superman out there. And I loved him as a player. He's one of my favorite players growing up. So that's my pick for my running back.
Mine too. I love Marshall Faulk, even though he was on the Rams, but I actually loved him when he was on the Colts. I had a Marshall Faulk Colts jersey back in the day, so.
Well, there you
go. I was on the Marshall Faulk hype for a while.
Yeah, and I like him.
I think I was like I became a pseudo Colts fan with Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison and Marshall Faulk, and then he went to the Rams, but still always had love for him.
And it's too bad he didn't get to play with Peyton Manning. I mean, they ended up drafting Edgerrin James, who's good, but you imagine Peyton Manning with Marshall Faulk, they probably wouldn't win a Super Bowl a little bit earlier.
That would have been killer. Yeah. I think they played one season together, Peyton's rookie year. That's it.
Well, I think they were 3-13 or something, so they weren't very good. But
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, and I like Emmitt Smith, but he was never that cool. I mean, he's just, I don't know.
I mean, I don't have a lot of love for Emmitt Smith because he was a Cowboy, but it was just hard to. Like, you had taken Marshall Faulk, so it was just hard to take anyone else, right? Like, it was just like, you could, I personally would like Terrell Davis more than Emmitt Smith, but that you can't argue against some of the numbers Emmitt Smith put up. Yes, he had a great offensive line, but, I mean, he still finished as the leading rusher in NFL history.
For sure.
And the most touchdowns in NFL history.
And he did it in Arizona.
You got to take the guy.
And he did it in Arizona Cardinals uniform, which is just weird.
That's right. Which was disgusting, but...
And you definitely got first pick for our tight ends. So who did you pick with your for your tight end?
Yes, I went with Tony Gonzalez, the guy who basically transformed the tight end position, I would say. Was drafted here in 97, went in the first round, picked 13. I would say he's probably one of the best tight ends of all time and one of the best of it, definitely the best of his era. He's a 10-time All-Pro, 14-time Pro Bowler. He led the NFL in receptions in 2004 as a tight end, and he has the most career yards and receptions for a tight end, and is top 10 in career touchdowns, including wide receivers. So it wasn't even close here with Tony Gonzalez. There are a couple of, maybe one or two other guys you might consider here, but Tony Gonzalez is the best of the bunch here. And this is a guy who really turned the tight end position into the dual threat position we see it in today's NFL.
Absolutely, and he's the Jerry Rice of tight ends, and maybe like
exactly. Yep.
Gronkowski is the Randy Moss of tight ends. Who, again, if people had one season or one game, maybe they pick Gronk. But prime Tony Gonzalez, he was the main receiving threat on those Chiefs teams for a long time, and his numbers are mind-boggling: 15,000 receiving yards, 111 receiving touchdowns, and it's Travis Kelce is 5,000 yards behind him, I think, before this season. Maybe it was this season, but it's going to take a lot for Travis Kelce to catch him, and he's a guy that's playing in a wide open era where many people consider him the best tight end of all time, but they conveniently forget Tony Gonzalez and all the things that he did. So you picked Tony G, and I went with Shannon Sharp. So he's another guy from this era that was a standout player. He's a current Hall of Famer. A really cool story. He was picked in the 7th round by the Broncos because he went to a small school. I think he went to Savannah State, and he was kind of a tweener. He's only like 6'2", 230, Now he'd probably play wide receiver. Maybe he could still play tight end in this era. But in the 90s, when you think of tight ends, you're thinking like, 6'6", 270, 280 maybe. Like, you need some guy that can block. You think Mark Bavaro and things like that. So he's fifth all-time in receiving yards by tight end. He's got 10,000 receiving yards, surrounded by guys who played in this era mostly, Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, Antonio Gates, for example. He only had 3,000-yard seasons, but I think that's kind of emblematic of the era that he was playing in. But he was still a 4-time All-Pro, 3-time Super Bowl champ, and he has the record still for most receiving yards by a tight end in a game. So good for him. So any thoughts on Shannon Sharpe?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, no, I like the pick of Shannon Sharpe. Another guy that, kind of changed the tight end position a little bit, given his undersize and all that. But yeah, great pick, solid pick. I think his brother also was a wide receiver in the NFL, so that probably led to him being drafted as well. I forget. His brother played on the Packers or something. Blinking on his name.
Or something. He's one of the best receivers ever. He just, he had a long injury history, and I think he had a disease.
What's his brother's name? I'm totally blanking on the name.
Sterling Sharpe.
Sterling Sharpe. Yes, Sterling Sharpe was his brother. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, he did play on the Packers.
He did indeed play on the Packers, and like I said, I think his he had a disease or an injury that ended his career a little bit earlier, but he was still a great receiver during his peak. So, all right. So we've gotten the skill positions out of the way on offense, so we'll jump into a couple offensive linemen. So who did you pick for your first offensive lineman?
Yeah, one of the first offensive linemen I took here was Larry Allen. He was picked in 94. He went round 2, pick 46. Considered one of the best guards of all time when part of that offensive line that was blocking for Emmitt Smith. He's a 7-time All-Pro, 11-time Pro Bowler. He's a member of the NFL 100th anniversary team as well. And, he's considered one of the more nastier guards and one of the more healthiest players to play this position. I think he's just a really good offensive lineman. And one thing I found out about Larry Allen as I was looking him up, some of his stats, he's only committed 48 penalties in his career out of 187 games that he's played in. So that was pretty impressive for an offensive lineman to have that less penalties. And so yeah, Larry Allen was my pick here.
I remember him mostly for bench pressing 700 pounds.
Yes, he did that. Yes.
He was just he was an insane athlete for who he was in the position. Like, you look at him, obviously he's a massive dude. He's one of the best linemen of all time, but you don't think that he's going to be basically a strongman and bench press 700 pounds. And he's kind of a cult figure.
And he was...
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just
I know, I was going to say he's deceptively quick and things like that. Like, you look at him and you're like, this guy's not going to bench 700 pounds. He's not going to run like a... whatever he ran in his 40-yard dash. He was just a good athlete, like you said.
He looks like Vince Wilfork, but he probably ran like a 4.6 or something like that.
Probably, yes.
So my first pick for offensive line, I went with who I think is like the prototypical left tackle, and that is Jonathan Ogden. So he was picked fourth overall by the Ravens in 1996 out of UCLA. He's the first draft pick by the Ravens since they moved from Cleveland to Baltimore, and just an incredible player. I really like when high offensive lineman picks work out, and yeah, he worked out. I'll say that.
Yes, he did.
Played 12 seasons in the NFL, 9-time All-Pro, 11-time Pro Bowl every year except his rookie season, and he was just a massive presence on the field. He's 6'9". He dominated people. And he was, if you could create a left tackle in a lab, he's the guy that you would come out with. He had a mean streak, but he was cerebral and smart, dependable, durable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know we can't talk about stats and 1,000 yards this and 1,000 yards that, but just an incredible player, Super Bowl champion, and one of the best offensive linemen of all time, and just a really cool guy to root for. So who was your second offensive line pick?
My second offensive line pick here was Willie Roaf, drafted in 1993, round 1, pick 8 by the Saints. And apparently his actual nickname was Nasty. That's how nasty of a player he was. He's a Hall of Famer. He was a 9-time All-Pro, 11-time Pro Bowler. He started in about 189 games over his 13 years careers, which is an average of 14 and a half games a season. And so, just another guy, between him and Larry Allen, just two nasty offensive linemen. It's kind of what you needed here in the 90s. And guys that, could play a lot of games and not get hurt. And so Willie Roaf was that guy. And, he's a good, solid offensive lineman. Really, just love the nastiness here of Willie Roaf. And I did think about Orlando Pace maybe here. But, just the nastiness of Willie Roaf went out here for me. So I went with him.
I considered Orlando Pace for my pick as well. I went with my pick, Will Shields, for two reasons. I figured I already picked a left tackle. I don't need another left tackle, even though both of them could play. I think he played guard his first year. But Will Shields was incredibly durable. Orlando Pace had some injury issues near the end of his career, but also an incredible player, so you couldn't go wrong there. But Will Shields, third-round pick in 1993 by the Chiefs. He played 14 seasons, did not miss a single game. So, again, 14 years, wow. 12-time Pro Bowler, 6-time All-Pro. And if you ask Pro Football Reference and their approximate value stat, he is the best player in Kansas City Chiefs history. So that's a franchise that has...
That's impressive.
Yeah. That has Priest Holmes. Tony Gonzalez is another guy that's almost a lifetime Chief. I know he played on the Falcons for a bit. Patrick Mahomes. But Will Shields is the number one guy. And he retired at 35 at the top of his game, and he was second-team All-Pro when he retired. So, yeah, there you go.
Good pick.
All right. So now we're moving on to the other side of the ball, and we will start with interior defensive line, a.k.a. defensive tackle. So who did you pick here? I know this is kind of a homer pick. I don't know why you went this direction, but go for
it. Yeah, this was probably a little bit more of a homer pick. I went Brian Young. He was taken in the 94 draft, round 1, pick 7 by the Niners. I mean, I probably could have gone someone like John Randall or Cortez Kennedy. Probably, those guys had a little bit better stats than Brian Young. But, I watched Brian Young growing up, and I was just one of the guys that I really liked on the Niners growing up, and that was Brian Young. And, he was the guy, he would just come in and do the dirty work. He was a beast. He was, he's a 4-time All-Pro, 4-time Pro Bowler. He's a Hall of Famer as well. He's also the comeback player of the year in 1999. I remember that injury he came back from where he broke his leg and they put like a metal rod inside of him. And so he has a career 89.5 sacks and 519 solo tackles. So I would say if he didn't have that injury, maybe he has better stats than, and he's maybe ahead of someone like a Cortez Kennedy maybe, but I just couldn't take Cortez Kennedy, and John Randall was probably the better pick here, but the homerism in me was too strong here for Brian Young, and so I took him.
I don't blame you. I get it. And he was also just inducted into the Hall of Fame last year, so good for him.
Yes.
So for my pick, I almost picked Warren Sapp, but similar to the reasons why I don't really like Randy Moss, I don't like Warren Sapp, because he came to Oakland and loafed, basically, was out of shape, etc. He still put up some numbers, whatever, but just I don't like him as a person. So this is my team. So I'm going to pick John Randall. And John Randall was actually undrafted. He came into the league in 1990. He went to a small school called Texas A&M Kingsville, so not the big Texas A&M Aggies. This is a completely different school. And he was just incredible. He's another just really cool player. He had the big eye black. He was super intimidating. He had this physical presence. And he's kind of the predecessor to Aaron Donald, where he was an undersized defensive tackle. He was like 6 foot, 290, maybe 6'1", 290, but he just completely dominated guys. He has an absurd 137 sacks in 185 starts. So, of course, as an undrafted guy, you're not going to come in and play and start right away. So it took him a little while to gear up, but he had 9 sacks his second year and just took off. He has 11 years of basically double-digit sacks, a couple, 1.8, 1.9.5 type season. 6-time first-team All-Pro and was second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting in 1998. So I love this guy. He was just so cool and so intimidating, and just one of the
I remember him.
Yeah, the more fun players again to root for in the 90s.
Yeah, he was nice on the Vikings. I remember that. He was basically that anchor of that Vikings defensive line. I'm just glad you didn't take Warren Sapp or Cortez Kennedy. Didn't like both those guys.
Yeah, definitely not Sapp. I almost did. I actually typed in Warren Sapp, and I was going through the numbers, and I was like,
I saw that. I was like, oh man, is Khaled actually going to take Warren Sapp here? I guess he will. Maybe. I was like, but maybe he'll change his mind because he'll see the other guys.
Yeah, I saw the light and went with John Randall. So next
Nice.
we picked our defensive ends. So who did you pick as your defensive end?
I took Michael Strahan. He was picked in 1993, round two, picked 40 by the Giants. Again, one of the best defensive ends to play the game. He holds the NFL record for most sacks in a season with 22 and a half. Led the NFL twice in sacks over his career. Has 141 and a half career sacks, which is number 6 all time. He's a 6-time All-Pro, Super Bowl champ, 7-time Pro Bowler. I think the only other player you can even consider here was Jason Taylor, but Strahan had better numbers than him, and so I went with the guy that anchored those nasty giant defensive lines and helped them win a Super Bowl, and that was Michael Strahan.
Yeah, all-time great player, even better daytime talk show host. So good for him, Michael Strahan. He just had it was almost like an alter ego on the field where he was just this nasty physical presence, and then off the field he was this big goofy smile with his gap and just
Yep.
Another cool guy to root for. So you mentioned Jason Taylor. That is my pick. He was just so disruptive, really fun player to watch. Wore the classic 99 that all the best defensive linemen should wear. And kind of like Julius Peppers, like if you built a defensive lineman in a lab or you grew one, or defensive end, sorry, it would be Jason Taylor. He's like 6'6", 270, tall, strong, lean, could cover, can play a little bit outside linebacker, but you definitely want him more often than not with his hand in the dirt. He wore a neck roll, which also made him look really cool. So just again, I think I'm just picking all cool guys on my, especially on my defense.
and he always had that shaved head look. He always shaved his head. Was bald, and it just made him look tougher.
Yeah, exactly. He was a 3rd-round pick in 1997. Came from a small school, but he's had an incredible career. He had 139 and a half sacks in 199 starts. 4-time All-Pro, Defensive Player of the Year in 2006. He had 18 and a half sacks in 2002, and it depends on which list you look at. If you go on Pro Football Reference, they have the official sack numbers that they've kept since 1982,
Yeah.
and then the unofficial one because it wasn't really a stat until then. But he's 7th all-time in official sacks and 11th in unofficial. So just an all-time great player that had an incredible career. So, All right.
Yep.
We'll move up a level on defense from defensive line to linebacker. So who did you pick for your linebacker?
Yes, and I want people to know you had the first pick here, so I did not take
You
the guy
gotta
took.
clarify.
I got to clarify. People will be like, what the hell? You didn't take this guy? I took Junior Seau. He went in the 1990 draft, round 1, pick 5 by the Chargers. Again, just a guy who could get the job done. He was a 9-time All-Pro, 12-time Pro Bowler. He was known for playing fast and hard. Really just the definition of a linebacker in this era. He had over 1,000 solo career tackles, 56 and a half sacks, 18 interceptions. And he was just that defensive anchor for the Chargers for many, many years. And so that's why I took him here. And I would say he's probably the second best linebacker here drafted in the 90s behind the guy you took. And the other guys I did consider were Zach Thomas and Derek Brooks.
Yeah, and may he rest in peace. He did commit suicide a few years ago,
yes.
Unfortunately. But he was an incredible player to watch. As a Raiders fan, I obviously wasn't rooting for him all the time because he was on the Chargers and then on the Patriots. But I can appreciate the player that he was and the man that he was and all that. So it's no shame being second to the gentleman that I picked, and that is Ray Lewis. So he went 26th overall in 1996 to the Ravens, and he's just one of the best linebackers of all time, period. He's the prototypical middle linebacker. He wore the really cool number. I think middle linebackers should either wear 52 or 55. That's it. And
yeah, absolutely. I agree.
He's a 10-time All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champ, Super Bowl MVP that first time around when they beat the Giants, 13 Pro Bowls, and 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, which I think makes him stand out from a lot of these other guys. But just an iconic player from this era of the NFL. He kind of spanned two eras, the late 90s into the 2000s. He was super intimidating. He did his little dance at the beginning of games. He was a great leader, kind of a controversial figure that may or may not have killed someone. So he had that killer instinct. He's a stone cold killer.
He was innocent. He was proven innocent.
There you go. Yeah, he's innocent in the eyes of the court, so I can't push that any further. But he just had that intimidation factor, and just an all-time, again, another cool player to root for, and he went out on top as a champion, and you can't really top that. So there you go.
Yep, I definitely remember that Super Bowl run where, people were like, "Oh, is Ray Lewis going to play?" I think he had some sort of pec injury, and they weren't sure if he was going to play, or he had some sort of bicep injury. I can't remember exactly what it was. And then he just played in the Super Bowl, and you're like, holy crap, how did this guy just end up playing in the Super Bowl? And people are like, oh, he was using things like deer antler spray and all this weird crap, but he played, man, and he had a great game. So I definitely remember that Super Bowl, and I definitely remember Ray Lewis going out on top on it against the Niners.
A lot of great memes came from that, and his use again of supposedly deer antler.
The deer antlers. Yeah.
I believe he had I believe it was a torn tricep, and he played in the Super Bowl.
Yes, something.
Yeah, with this giant, it looked like a leg brace that he kind of retrofitted onto his arm. But just a cool guy with the eye black, and the, just everything about him was just intimidation and dominance. So we actually picked two linebackers. So who was your second pick for linebackers?
My second pick here for linebacker was Zach Thomas. He was drafted in 1996. He went in round 5, towards the end of round 5 with pick 154. He was drafted here by the Dolphins. And so Zach Thomas, he's a 7-time All-Pro, 7-time Pro Bowler. He's not a Hall of Famer, but he is a finalist this year, and this is his 4th time being a finalist, so hopefully he will get in this year. We'll see. But he's led the NFL twice in tackles. He has over 1,100 solo tackles, 17 career interceptions, 20.5 career sacks. He was an anchor for the Dolphins for 12 years and was just overall a great player. I think, when we're talking linebackers, I consider him a tier below here, the Ray Lewis and Junior Seau, and the guy you took here as well, Derek Brooks. And so I would just consider him just a step below those guys, but again, a really good linebacker who is possibly a future Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I think he'll get in eventually for all the things that you stated, the stats and the accumulated stats, and the fact that he was one of the best linebackers in an era that had plenty of great linebackers. So I think he gets overshadowed. He's a guy that just looks like a linebacker. You know what I mean? Like his head is like,
he just looks it. He just looks the part.
Yeah, his head and neck is like a fire hydrant. He has a head like a cinder block, and he would just destroy people. He's another guy that wore the neck roll or the cowboy collar, which was big in the 90s, which just made him look super tough. It was like him and like Bill Romanowski, those kind of guys. I love that he was kind of undersized. He was under 6 foot, but 240, so he was still he wasn't very tall, but he was thick and strong, and just another guy that is not the prototypical linebacker, but you see him, you're like, yeah, that dude's a middle linebacker, and he's a badass. So,
yep, exactly.
The guy that I picked is Derek Brooks. So he went 28th overall in 1995, and what I liked about Derek Brooks is that he was not your typical middle linebacker, right? When you think of guys like Junior Seau, Ray Lewis, Zach Thomas, you think of like thumpers, right? These guys are going to come downhill. They're going to light up the guard or the fullback and then make the play in the backfield and do all that. Maybe not so much a sideline-to-sideline type guy, but Derek Brooks was an incredible athlete that I think brought in this new era of middle linebackers that can also cover, right? They had the famous, he formed that spine of that dominant Tampa Bay defense with John Lynch and Warren Sapp, but he was always asked, or one of his main responsibilities was covering the middle of the field in that Tampa 2, which is a Tampa cover 2. And there's very few guys, maybe now guys can do it a little easier because that's what we're expecting them to do in a more passing league. But in that era, I think he ushered in this era of coverage linebackers, guys like, Fred Warner, maybe Luke Kuechly.
Yep.
guys that maybe aren't thumpers,
Bobby Wagner.
Bobby Wagner, etc. Right? I mean, guys that'll still lay the wood and take a guy out of a game, but just in a different
But they can
era.
also cover.
Yeah, exactly. Brian Urlacher is another guy that you think of, played a similar role in the defense. So Derek Brooks, he played 224 consecutive games, never missed a game in 14 years, 9-time All-Pro, Defensive Player of the Year, Walter Payton Man of the Year in 2000. So no accusations of off-the-field impropriety like his buddy Ray Lewis here. So maybe not the coolest guy, but he's also another guy that wore 55. So the coolest number for a linebacker again.
Yep.
54 isn't bad. I know that's what Zach Thomas wore, but 55 is just cool, man. There's nothing else. Yep. No other way to describe it. So
it's the best number here for a middle linebacker.
Yeah, there you go. Alrighty, so we'll jump up another level on defense to our defensive backs, and we will start with our cornerbacks. So who did you grab at corner?
I went with Champ Bailey here. Was drafted in the '99 draft here, pick number 7 by the Commanders, aka the Din Redskins. He's a 7-time All-Pro, 12-time Pro Bowler, led the NFL in interceptions in 2006, and just overall a stud shutdown corner for most of his playing career. He has 52 career interceptions, which is only 26th all time, but he has 203 passes defended in his career, which is number 1 all time. And so you can see, maybe he wasn't getting the picks, but people weren't throwing at him, and he was. And when they were these passes were getting batted down. And so I think, at some point he might have had more picks, but people came to know him as a shutdown corner and don't throw toward Champ Bailey's side. Other guys I would have thought about were Ty Law, Charles Woodson, but I think just having watched Bailey play and growing up watching him play and seeing the shutdown corner he was, I went with him. I also maybe thought about Aeneas Williams. Then I remembered he's the guy who took out Steve Young, and so I didn't pick him. Didn't even think about him after that. But yes, there we go. That's my pick there.
I dig it. And he's also one of the guys that was involved in a rare player-for-player trade in the NFL when he was traded for Clinton Portis from Washington to Denver. Great player, all-time shutdown corner, et cetera, et cetera. I went with a guy that I personally love, both as a fan, as a player, as a person, et cetera, and a guy that you could actually pick for either cornerback or safety. So, and that is Charles Woodson. So Charles Woodson was taken 4th overall in 1998 out of Michigan. He was a Heisman runner-up, and just one of the most accomplished football players, period. I'm talking about NFL, college, high school, whatever, he's like his Wikipedia accomplishments little, box on the side takes up almost the whole screen. It's insane,
Yeah.
Defensive Rookie of the Year, 8-time All-Pro, Super Bowl champ with the Packers, Defensive Player of the Year with the Packers as well in his mid-30s. Just an incredible ball hawk. He's a guy that could do it all. And he had almost like 3 stages of his career. He had like the early Oakland years where he's a shutdown corner, just a ball hawk, and then he goes to Green Bay. He also plays corner, but also plays safety there, and then comes back to Oakland in his late 30s where he helps transition the team into, the Derek Carr era, the Las Vegas era, et cetera, and he's a guy that is 2nd all-time in pick sixes with 11 behind Rod Woodson.
Wow.
5th all-time in interceptions with 65. And this is a cool stat. Personally, I think it's a cool stat. He is 3 tackles short of 1,000 tackles career. And only him, Rondé Barber, and Antoine Bethea, if you believe it, are the only DBs with like even close to that number.
Yeah, wow.
Everybody else
That's
with
crazy.
1,000 plus is a linebacker. So it just shows you.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows you the versatility, the coverage, the ball hawk skills, the tackling ability, the longevity, because he played till he was 37, 38. So, yeah, he also could have been my pick for safety, to be honest with you. But most of his career was at cornerback. So, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So who was your pick for safety?
Okay, got to clarify again. I didn't have first pick here because I would have taken the guy you took. but I went with Leroy Butler. He was drafted in the 1990 draft, went in round 2, pick 48, was drafted by the Packers. Butler is a 4-time All-Pro, 4-time Pro Bowler. He's a Hall of Famer. For people that don't know, he is definitely a Hall of Famer. He didn't have the flashy stats, but he was pretty solid. He did a little bit of everything. He had 38 career interceptions, 13 forced fumbles. He has a career 474 solo tackles. So other guys that came to mind here at this position were Lawyer Malloy, Rodney Harrison, and John Lynch. And for me, Butler felt a little bit more of a complete safety to me because he could do a bit of everything, and he has more career interceptions than all those guys while posting similar numbers in other categories that you look at. And, guys like Rodney Harrison and John Lynch were more thumper-type safeties. Lawyer Malloy was more coverage, but Leroy Butler could do a little bit of both. He could be the thumper when you needed him to be, or he could be the guy who was out there picking off quarterbacks. So for me, the pick was Leroy Butler here.
Oh, yeah, I can't fault you for that pick. I know you did have the second pick, so you couldn't take my guy, but Leroy Butler.
Yeah. And it was kind of painful to take Butler too, because he's part of those, Packers teams that dominated the Niners on their way to the Super Bowl. So, and I definitely remember this guy. He was one of the guys that stood out to me on their defense. So
yeah, the ones
it was a little bit painful to take him, but I was like, he was a good enough player that I should take him.
Yeah, they're the ones that ruined your childhood for the most part.
Exactly.
So the player that Sulman is alluding to that I picked was Brian Dawkins. So he was a second-round pick, 61st overall in 1996 to the Eagles. He's another super cool guy. I'm continuing my theme here. He has the coolest nickname on this list. They call him Weapon X, or Wolverine.
Weapon X, right? And he used to do that celebration, right, where you put up.
He X. Sure did. And he was just so intimidating. He was the Ray Lewis of linebackers, and this was an era where you could really lay dudes out coming across the middle of the field. So guys like Rodney Harrison, John Lynch, sure, I could see them being picks here, and they kind of fit that era. So aside from the intimidation and the physicality and all that, he was an incredibly accomplished player. He was a 5-time All-Pro, 9-time Pro Bowler, played till he was almost 40. He had that second stretch of his career with the Broncos after a long time in Philly, and he is 13th all-time in forced fumbles, which is another cool little stat. So again, a super cool guy, an intimidating player, and just so intimidating, so typical of this era of physical defensive play. I don't know if he would be as good as he was in this era, but just an all-timer.
But he's definitely the best safety here, taken in the 90s, easily, hands down.
Yep. All right, and our final picks are the kickers. So we didn't pick punters, but it's all good. Punters are people too, but
nobody cares about punters.
I mean, as a Raiders fan, I wish I could have picked Shane Leckler, but he was drafted in 2000, so I probably would. I don't even know who else I would have went. Maybe like Sean Landetta, something like that. They just play for so long. You think about guys that oh yeah, I remember this punter from 2007. He was drafted in 89 or something like that. So, who was your pick?
Exactly.
Who was your pick for kicker?
Well, again, you had the first pick here on kickers, I think. So I just took whatever kicker came to mind, and that was David Akers. He was a 6-time All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler, not a Hall of Famer, but was the NFL scoring leader in 2010 and 2011. And won the Golden Toe Award, which is given to the NFL's top kicker, and he won that in 2011. He is 14th overall in field goals made and has an 81% field goal percentage. The only other guy that came to mind to me was Phil Dawson. I guess there's a theme here for me. I'm taking guys that were 49ers at one point here for kickers, and really the guy you took is the best kicker here, probably of all time in the NFL.
Yeah, so you took mostly Niners, and I just took total badasses. So I think that makes sense. So as you alluded to, once again, my pick is Adam Vinatieri. So he was undrafted, joined the Patriots in 1996 after a year in NFL Europe. He played at South Dakota State, of all places. He played an absurd 24 years in the NFL and actually played longer for the Colts than he did the Patriots, which would surprise me looking back at it. He played 14 years for the Colts, 10 for the Patriots. Only All-Pro 3 times, and only a Pro Bowler 3 times. But in terms of overall career, he's second all-time in games played, 365. Tom Brady's catching up to him. If he plays till he's 50, he'll catch him. The all-time NFL leader in points and field goals. I mean, obviously, you play that long, you're probably going to be the all-time leader. And just, again, another guy that's just a stone-cold killer, man. Just the clutchest kicker of all time. He hits 2 field goals in that horrible Tuck Rule game to send the Patriots to the AFC Championship. He wins the Super Bowl a couple weeks later against the Rams. And then 2 years after that, he hits the game winner against the Carolina Panthers in overtime, I believe. So just, yeah, the greatest kicker of all time, bar none. And I'm glad that you let me pick the kicker first. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, that was the guy. No one else came even close to him. So,
is there anybody, just maybe 1 or 2 guys that it just killed you to leave off that you really wanted to include, but just couldn't squeeze them in?
Yeah, a couple of guys. Obviously, Terrell Davis was one guy for me. I think that was probably the biggest one that was like, damn, maybe I should have taken him over Emmitt Smith. But that was really the only guy. But everyone else, I think everyone I wanted, I got. Or you had drafted him before me, so I think we got a good mix of players.
Listen, I mean, I love Terrell Davis, one of the best running backs of all time. He had that incredible peak, but you can't take him over Emmitt Smith. He just can't.
Exactly right, yeah. But personally, that was the guy I'd wanted.
For sure. I mean, he had a 2,000-yard season.
A guy who wasn't drafted in. He did. Yeah, he did. So, but you can't take him over Emmitt Smith.
For sure.
I had to do that.
Well, we hope you guys enjoyed that. We're going to be definitely doing a lot more of these. This was a lot of fun, very nostalgic. Maybe we'll take it back to the 80s, to guys that we didn't see play until the 90s. Of course, we'll do the 2000s and 2010s because we're in 2023. So thank you, everybody, for checking us out. Make sure to follow and subscribe to our podcast on all the major podcasting platforms. That's Spotify, Apple, et cetera. You can find us on social media, on Facebook at the 4040 Vision Podcast, and on Instagram and Twitter at 4040 Vision Pod. Really appreciate you guys. Thank you.